I learned to be quiet before I even knew I was being silenced. That sentence wrote itself across the years, carved into the walls of my mind like etchings in old wood. 15 years of marriage to Rowan Weiss had left me fluent in silence. Our home didn't echo with arguments. No slamming doors, just the steady erosion of self, polished by years of soft condescension and words unsaid. Dinner with his family was always conducted in German, a language I wasn't meant to understand. Ingrid Weiss, my mother-in-law, was masterful at restraint, her voice always calm, her words always sharp. She didn't scream. She sliced, and she never hesitated to dissect me, assuming I was too stupid to comprehend. Rowan would sit beside me, his fork methodically tapping porcelain, never interrupting, never correcting. Loyalty, I learned early on, wasn't something he divided. It belonged entirely to her. Some days I wondered if I even had a name anymore. I was she, her, or simply that, a guest in my own skin. But I wasn't asleep. Not anymore. 2 years ago, I started studying German. It began with podcasts, whispered voices under my pillow, repeating phrases while Rowan slept beside me. I bought a second-hand grammar book and kept it hidden behind cookbooks. No one touched. My notes lived in the back of recipe cards. My progress was slow, but it was mine. No one knew. Then, one Thursday, something shifted. Ingrid leaned in during dinner, cut a piece of lamb with military precision, and muttered to Rowan in German, "That body. I don't know what my son sees in it." The sentence didn't require translation. My breath hitched. My wine glass trembled. I smiled. Inside, I screamed. Every syllable landed like broken glass across my skin. But I didn't flinch. I picked up my phone beneath the table and tapped the voice recorder. The red light blinked silently, collecting truth like a net. Later, in the bathroom, I replayed the sentence. Again and again. It wasn't just the insult, it was the certainty in her voice. The assumption that I was furniture. Deaf, dumb, decorative. But I wasn't. 3 days later, Rowan found one of my notebooks. He flipped through the pages of verbs and sentence structures, chuckled, and said, "Sweetheart, why bother? This stuff's way over your head." I didn't respond. There was a time when he would have celebrated even my smallest curiosity. A time when he left sticky notes on my mirror with hand-drawn hearts. Once, he even stood up to Ingrid. Just once. I remember the shock in her eyes more than the words he said. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who barely looked at me, except to assess how much space I took up. Love doesn't die loudly. It disappears, quietly, like steam from a forgotten kettle. The next week, I visited a bookstore. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed air. A clerk, a woman close to my age with a kind, tired face, watched me browse. When I approached the counter, she handed me the receipt and said, "You have the eyes of someone locked inside." I froze. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. At home, I wrote the sentence in my journal and underlined it 3 times. That night, I replayed the recording of Ingrid's voice again. My hands shook, but something inside me stood taller. I had spent years shrinking, disappearing, but I remembered myself. The version before I became someone else's silence. In the quiet of our bedroom, I pulled an old USB drive from a drawer. I copied the audio file onto it, then slipped it into the hollowed spine of a worn-out book Rowan had never touched. War doesn't always begin with fire. Sometimes it starts with a whisper. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "They think I'm invisible. Let them." The rain had started just as we stepped inside the lobby of the apartment complex. Rowan shook off his umbrella while Ingrid looked around with a critical eye, already judging the architecture as tired. I followed a step behind, silent as always. The realtor, Mr. Hans, greeted us warmly in German, of course. I nodded politely, careful not to respond beyond pleasantries. It was the role I played. The quiet wife. The unknowing woman. We moved through the apartment, a spacious third-floor unit with large windows and antique molding. Ingrid inspected every corner as if she were the buyer, not me. "Too much sunlight," she said in German. "She'll wilt like a houseplant in this." Rowan chuckled. I smiled tightly. In the kitchen, as Hans detailed the layout, Rowan leaned in toward him and said something I wasn't meant to hear. "She doesn't need to know the paperwork details. She's not involved in decisions." In German. My heart didn't drop. It folded, quietly, neatly, like a letter never meant to be sent. I kept my face neutral, but something had shifted. My fingers curled around the edge of my coat pocket, feeling the recording device. It was on. Always on now. That night, Rowan poured wine like nothing had happened. We sat across from each other in a dining room that felt too large, too quiet. I couldn't eat. "I noticed you looked distracted today," he said finally. "Just tired," I replied. He nodded, then glanced at his phone. "By the way," I moved forward on the offer, "we'll finalize by Monday." "We?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. He didn't look up. "Yes, we." I wanted to scream. Instead, I went to bed early, headphones in, listening to a podcast in German, one about reclaiming self-worth after emotional trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days later, while cleaning the living room, I found him on a call. Hushed, curt, clearly not meant for me. "Yes. Just transfer it to the secondary account." "No, she has no idea. She doesn't ask questions." He paused. "It's better this way." My knees nearly gave out, but I held on to the couch, grounding myself. When he left the room, I checked the phone log. A lawyer's office. One I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the bed that night and stared into the mirror. "You're disappearing," I whispered to myself. "And he's helping you vanish." Later that week, I had coffee with a friend of Rowan's cousin, Hans, the realtor. He was kind, older, with warm eyes. As we chatted in the bookstore cafe, he lowered his voice. "You know, I saw the way you looked at that apartment, like a prisoner tasting air. I've seen that look before." I blinked hard. "You think so?" He smiled. "I know so." I walked home that night without buying a book, but with a new sentence echoing in my mind, "A prisoner tasting air." I wrote it down in my journal. The following afternoon, Rowan found my notebook open on the table. He read the German vocabulary list and laughed. "Sweetheart," he said, shaking his head. "Still trying with this? It's way over your head." I didn't reply. I just looked at him. Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. Or maybe it was the light. He left the room. I tore out the page and fed it to the fire, but not before taking a photo. That night I lay awake. In my head, I saw flashes of our early days, notes slipped under doors, the way he stood up to his mother once at a holiday dinner. I remembered how he defended me. And now, 15 years later, he couldn't even imagine me understanding the language they used to erase me. Love didn't die. It just left quietly one day and never returned. I saw it in the way he said she doesn't need to know. I heard it in Ingrid's sharp tongue, and I felt it in my own silence until now, because now I was listening, and more importantly I was remembering. The first night alone in my new apartment was quiet in a way that didn't ache. It was a modest place, 1 bedroom, pale blue walls, an old but working heater that hummed like it was rooting for me. I stood in the center of it, keys in hand, not needing to ask anyone if I could hang a photo or what I should make for dinner. There were no rules here, just me, and that was enough. I furnished it simply, thrift store finds, hand-me-down mugs from a coworker, and one small bookshelf that held only the books I wanted to read. No traces of Ingrid's china, no echoes of Rowan's preferences. I didn't even take our old couch. I'd rather sit on the floor than bring a memory into this space. I learned how to do the things I'd always been told I wasn't good at. I opened a bank account under my name. I filled out insurance paperwork with shaky hands. I applied for part-time translation work and was hired by a local women's center, helping immigrants bridge the language gap. I used a whiteboard to track each win, got health insurance, translated first intake form, bought basil and didn't kill it. It sounds silly, but when you're rebuilding a life, every brick matters. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. The Women's Center asked me to speak at an upcoming healing event. The theme was Voices Unheard. I stared at the email for hours. Me? Talk? Out loud? I almost declined. Then I remembered how Ingrid's words once pinned me to my own silence. I said yes. The day of the event, I stood behind a podium in a small community center gym. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, but the room pulsed with something electric, people ready to hear, maybe even heal. My name is Maren Holt, I began, my voice firmer than expected. I spent 15 years learning that silence isn't peace, it's prison. I spoke about the power of language, how I had learned German in the dark, alone, just to reclaim my right to understand. I didn't need a sword, I said. I just needed a sentence. I quoted Dr. Leon Mercer, who'd helped me through the darkest stretch. Your story doesn't end where they silence you. It begins when you speak. In the front row, a woman in her 70s wiped tears. Her eyes met mine with something between sorrow and pride. Afterward, a man approached me, Callum Reyes, a volunteer at the center. People need to hear this, he said. You're not just surviving, you're guiding. That night, I walked home lighter. I wasn't just reclaiming my voice. I was lending it. A week later, Dr. Mercer handed me a letter. Handwritten. Old paper. Neat cursive that stopped my breath. It's from your mother, she said softly. I opened it at home. My hands trembled, not from fear, but uncertainty. The words read, I never defended you. I should have, but I didn't know how to be brave. I lived in silence too, but you didn't. You broke the cycle. I didn't cry out of pain. I cried because the apology came without condition. I wrote back, not to reopen anything, just to say I heard you. Thank you. And that was enough. A few days later, a local news outlet picked up my speech. The video had captions. She spoke and we listened. Messages flooded the Women's Center. Stories from all over the country. Women who had buried their voices under years of keeping peace. I was invited to speak at a national advocacy event. I didn't wear anything fancy, just jeans, a clean shirt, and the weightless confidence of someone who'd stopped asking for permission to exist. I started a blog called My Voice Back. Each week, I translated and shared stories from women who had been silenced, by partners, by language, by fear. It grew quickly, but I didn't feel like a leader. I felt like someone who had simply decided not to whisper anymore. One evening I got a call. The name on the screen, Rowan. I let it ring. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded unfamiliar, strained, smaller. You really did it, huh? I listened. Then I deleted it. There was no bitterness, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty. Outside my window, a neighbor's dog chased leaves. The world kept spinning, and I was finally in step with it. Later, I opened my journal, flipping past pages filled with grief and rage, and wrote the only sentence that mattered now. Ja, und diesmal höre ich auf mich.